Morning. I'd like to call the regularly scheduled Manatee County Planning Commission meeting for October 8th to order. If you would, please rise for Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Myers,
Yes, sir.
are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes this morning, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any comments from the County Attorney's Office?
No, sir.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, do you wish to pull anything from the agenda? Hearing nothing. Next item on our agenda are the September 10th, 2015 minute meetings. I'll entertain a motion.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
On page, I think it's 3, where it talks about the discussion continued on emergency access gates. There's after the parentheses says, cannot extend a second entrance to Mulholland Road due to land development code requirements. I don't remember that conversation occurring. And if that was said, then our bosses did something different than that at their last meeting because they did require it, an entrance. So is that true? Was it said?
Mr. Bauer.
I was just saying, that is a subject that I brought up. I believe what I said was something along the fact that whether it's a requirement or not, we make special approvals for things all the time, so why not ask for special approval? And if that was something they would consider. So I think that's where that conversation came up.
I guess my question is, did somebody actually say that you can't do it because there's a land development code requirements? That's the way I'm reading it.
Member Horgan, no, I just summarized it. I didn't spell out the whole line. I just briefly stated that it was due to land development code requirements. I didn't spell it all out. If you want me to go back and do that, I'm willing to do that.
I'm almost thinking that if we deleted that little bit there, we wouldn't leave it open for somebody to come back and say that there was a land development requirement.
Yeah, because there clearly is not.
Yeah, there's not.
There is no requirement against that, clearly, so.
Right, so but
yeah.
that's what it's indicating there, and my concern is that somebody comes back later and decides to sue us because
That's fine. I can make that correction. No worries.
Okay.
that's the only comment I have.
So with that being necessary, do we,
You can just approve the minutes as amended.
as amended? Okay, could you please clarify what the amendment is? Just
I'd make the motion to approve the minutes, deleting from cannot to requirements, that area between the comments on that fourth paragraph on page 3.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the amended minutes. Is there a second? Ms. Lakowiak, second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye, passes unanimously. All right, the next thing on the agenda are citizen comments. Is there anybody in the public who wishes to make a comment related to items that are not on the agenda? Is there anybody who wishes to make a statement? Okay, seeing nobody, we'll go to the next item on the agenda. That would be the consent agenda. Oh, is it, I'm sorry, we're on the regular agenda. There is no consent item. So we'll go to the regular agenda. And being a text amendment, we don't have to swear anybody in. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Ms. Barrett.
Hello, Lisa Barrett with staff, and I do not need to be sworn as this is a legislative item. This is LDCT 1501 Ordinance 1529, a Land Development Code Text Amendment. And I just have a short well, not a slide presentation, but I just would like to remind the Planning Commission and the public, in June of this year, the board approved an amended and restated land development code. That was primarily a major house cleaning of the existing land development code that we've had for years. reorganizing the code, updating some internal language, and also downsizing the code, taking out some public works standards and property maintenance requirements that were not really deemed land development regulations, and we put those into public works manuals, and the property maintenance code was put into the code of ordinances. And the reorganization, since it has been approved since June, staff has been implementing that code since then and has noticed some errors that are not uncommon with a project of this size and scale. And most of those errors are just Scribner's errors, and that's what's mainly included in this cleanup. Some references internally had to be corrected, just minor items. There were a few ordinances that have been previously approved by the board that were not included in the amended and restated code, so those are also included in this ordinance. That includes the requirements for trees on lots and tree replacement sizes. That was approved earlier this year, I think in January or February, and that was missed with the amended code. So that information needs to be put back in, as that's an issue that comes up on many hearings. Also, some information that staff felt needed to be put back into the code has been included, and that's primarily related to survey requirements. The consultant was relying mainly on Florida statutes, but a review from the county surveyor deemed that some of that language should go back into the code, and he's here if you have any questions on that. So again, this is really just primarily a cleanup of some of the errors that have been caught, and we anticipate more changes in the future just to primarily catch some of those minor errors or Scribner's errors. So those will probably come back to you again early next year.
Okay,
So if you have any questions.
thank you. Mr. Rutledge.
Yeah, again, my assessment of all of this is restructuring to make it more efficient, more understandable, and more accommodating to getting things completed, correct?
That's correct. That's what happened in June.
Right. And so I'm curious, and it may be a small issue, but I want to make sure that this is in the same process, is that the change in the surveying requirements are not more meat to the bones. They're really required. This is really something that's going to be important, and it's not just to make the list now 10 items instead of 5 items. And I just want to make sure that is that your sense of it, that this is really unclear and has to be clarified?
Todd Boyle can clarify more if need be, but the consultant was relying primarily on the Florida statutes, and Todd reviewed the information and felt to better serve the public and the developers that the information that was previously in the code needed to be restated.
And Mr. Boyle, if you could please step up. And again, for clarification, these were items that there was a gap between state statute and what Manatee County would expect. And for instance, I see something as regarding size of text, size of the documents being presented. Is that
Yes.
the type of information?
Yeah, it's data related. Some of it is just born out of practical experience, that when you have a plat that's scanned and then printed out again, it sometimes, if the text is too small, will become illegible. And so that was a standard that was established that by and large permits the scanned plats to remain legible for the public. Otherwise, could become worthless information or really cause some serious concerns. The requirement for benchmarks, that's something that, to the best of my knowledge, every community requires, because elevations are a huge deal and is a profound impact on a residence, especially now with the federal government looking more and more at FEMA. It's not something that Florida statute requires because it's just a minimum, but to better serve the public. And I've had this discussion with local surveyors, so this isn't just me presuming upon myself to require standards that the local surveyors wouldn't want. They want these back. They recognize that. And I would additionally add that the property appraiser's office has relied upon the land development code to assist them with their review for completeness and to help them with their processes. So that's where this is largely coming from.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Clegg, you had something?
I do. In the state legislature, they call this a glitch bill. And it's not uncommon when you have a significant legislative rewrite to have to do one. If you go back and look on the clerk's website at the ordinances that were adopted in the early 90s when the first code was put in place, you will find a couple of glitch ordinances that are a lot bigger than this one. Several of us on the staff side and the legal side predicted we'd have to do at least one when we redid the land development code, because there's just too much material moving around to streamline your whole code, to expect to not miss anything or decide later, well, we changed something and we want to change it back. But it should be clear for the record that the restoration of this language into the code is to put back something that's been the county practice for many, many years. It's not as though you're being asked to recommend a new policy that's never been in place before. Rather, we're restoring something that reflects our longstanding existing practice. I wouldn't be that surprised if 6 months from now, we come to you with another glitch ordinance and say some other things were identified by staff people where they feel something should not have been removed from the code because they feel it's important, even though the consultant was charged with trying to streamline and remove as much as possible. And so the consultant said, well, those are details you don't normally see in other codes. But as we go through the practice of applying the new code, we may see more of this.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Boyle, just to restate and clarify, there's nothing in addition to information that was previously included in the code. We're not adding anything.
I think I may have sought to improve the quality of the monuments, if I recall, if I could look at. Yes, the permanent reference monuments, that's something that Florida statute implies should be done, that you have a concrete monument at the plat boundaries.
Correct.
But then they, several years ago, qualified that with optional. And that word optional really threw things into the, a tailspin, and has resulted in, if you apply the letter of the law, that you can set what isn't always the best monument for the plat that best serves the public. That's one point that I'm really trying to tune up and make that better protection to the public. That's really what that is. It does represent an expense to the developer to pay the surveyor to put in that higher quality monument. But that better quality monument is mission critical and is better for the public in the long term to protect and preserve the location of boundary lines.
Could you please clarify what an optional PRM might be?
Well, no, it's not an optional PRM, but the wording from the Florida statutes is you shall set a minimal cross-sectional area of 12.25 square inches, 2 feet long, and it optionally shall be encased in concrete. It's an iron rod optionally encased in concrete for the stability of the rod. So that word optional caused the thing to be put into, well, who decides that? And it's pretty much been the platting surveyor's option because he's familiar with the site. And in fact, there are times when it would be sufficient to set an iron rod, or in places where there is impervious material, asphalt, concrete, where you would not set a concrete monument. But in most places, we're dealing with sandy soil here in Florida, and just merely an iron rod and cap may serve sufficient for the average homeowner for their property, their individual lot. But for the whole of the boundary, and as that boundary is adjacent to the next plat that gets built or along a public right-of-way, that more substantial monument is better capable of surviving over time. It's less prone to being disturbed by landscaping, sidewalks being installed. It's just a better resource for everyone.
And again, to clarify, the option has the option to use an iron rod, such as in a roadway. Has that been removed?
No.
Okay.
No, because there has to be that latitude that is just, there's an impracticality to always requiring a concrete monument.
Okay.
And the wording I have here, I believe, addresses that sufficiently to provide the greatest benefit without unrealistic costs. My time in surveying prior to working for the county was public or private sector. So I've lived this on the other side and have dealt with the frustrations that come along with platting property and doing the work physically in the field. So I've been there, I understand this, and it was in that context that I tried to find the right balance between what would best serve the public in the long term and really what the day in and day out nuts and bolts of actually doing the work and doing boundary surveys require.
Okay.
And I
Thank
paid
you.
to replace a lot of them, so I agree.
Right.
The second time is really painful.
They may be called permanent, but they're far from it.
Right, yeah, in Florida with, we don't have the kind of soil that necessarily lends itself most of the time to permanent, especially when you're going up against a grader or a bulldozer, it's gone, no matter what you set at that point. But for the average run-of-the-day landscapers putting in sod, that kind of thing, it really is to the best interest of the public to have this standard be clarified that we want concrete monuments with a few exceptions to allow for the physical conditions out there. And I work a lot with the surveyors on this. This is not a blind checklist that I don't talk with the surveyors on.
Okay, thank you. Are there any additional questions? Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Barrett, did you have anything in addition? Okay, all right. If there are no other questions, Chair will entertain a motion.
You have to take public comment.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there anybody in the public who wishes to come forward and speak on this item? Thank you, Mr. Clay.
Got to do it every time.
Seeing none, we'll close the public comment portion of the hearing, and again, Chair will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll recommend a motion based on the staff report, evidence presented, comments made at the public hearing, and the finding request to be consistent with the Manatee County Comprehensive Plan in accordance with Section 341 of the Land Development Code. I move to recommend adoption of the Manatee County Ordinance 15-29, amending the Manatee County Land Development Code as amended as recommended staff.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. There's a motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Lukowiak, second. We'll call the matter to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Passes unanimously. Okay. Are there any other comments, questions, concerns for the good of the order? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing.